Hello, Dine Sports viewers. We are back for UFC 293 this weekend in Sydney, Australia. Israel Adesanya defending the middleweight championship against the oncoming Sean Strickland in what is a good card, an exciting card with a lot of Australian presence, Oceania presence, as the UFC makes its return for the first time since 2019 down under. Nick, how are we feeling about UFC 293 this weekend?
Yeah, it's not bad, man. It's getting a lot of heat because it is a pay-per-view. I mean, for what you got to pay for a pay-per-view, it is kind of, I don't know, not the deepest card, I'd say, but as far as just like a fight fan goes, there's a lot of fun fights here. Should be a lot of violence. And yeah, Sydney crowd is always electric, so definitely looking forward to it. As a pretty much hardcore fan at this point.
Yeah, exactly. We're watching whatever garbage they put out. Anyways,
Yeah.
This is a pretty solid
This
card.
is
Could
better than
could be
garbage. Yeah.
stronger, but obviously headlined, carried by Adesanya. We'll jump right into it. The main event, sitting as a minus 700 favorite against Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland stepping up, taking this fight. There was a lot of talks. Would it be Strickland? Would it be Dricus du Plessis facing Adesanya for the belt here in Sydney? Obviously, we got Strickland, who has really been a great presence in his return from hiatus in the UFC, coming back from that motorbiking injury, and being on quite the tear at middleweight since, winning a lot of fights, main eventing constantly, always putting on entertaining bouts for the fans. Not a guy I'm very particular about, just based on his fighting style. While he is aggressive, always willing to box, just throw down with guys. He doesn't always, find the finish. Obviously, his last showing against Abus Magomedov was, one of his better in recent memory. Um, but clearly, he's going to be up against it here against who I consider one of the greatest ever, Adesanya. Certainly, in terms of kickboxing and technical striking skill, Strickland really is going to have a hard time getting inside against a guy like Izzy. So fluid in switching stances, much more willing to use, different weapons, the kicks, the knees, than a guy like Strickland, who's much more oriented on his boxing. I know you're a big Strickland fan, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, but I really feel like if this is a fight where he again, cannot check his ego, does not elect to grapple, goes in and tries to strike with one of the best to ever do it, we are going to see Sean Strickland get knocked out. I think Adesanya is too clean, and well, we've seen him in a bit of lackluster fights against, more power-oriented strikers. Against a guy like Strickland, who's high in volume and, willing to throw, willing to exchange. I really don't see this being a dormant fight. Probably going to be one that's has a pace pushed by Sean Strickland as the underdog. But obviously, Adesanya is going to be landing, the blows that he wants, connecting more often than Sean and able to put together better combination punches. So I think Adesanya really cruises in this spot. He could stay as long as at range as he'd like, pick apart the legs of Strickland, pick him apart from distance. And obviously, if Strickland elects to wrestle, we've been hearing word out of his camp, even before the Pereira fight, oh, he's taken down Magomed Ankalaev with ease. He has the credentials in jiu-jitsu. This guy's just an idiot that does not tend to shoot in for takedowns. And even though that's really what I see his one path to victory here against Adesanya, I don't imagine that'll come to fruition this weekend. I don't think he'd find success grappling against Izzy either. Izzy's bigger, stronger, and has proven the ability to defend takedowns before. So yeah, I think this is all Adesanya. He's a little worse than even money to win by finish in the spot. Never a safe bet with Adesanya, but I feel like just with Strickland's style, we're going to be more likely to see a finish here as opposed to some of the other bouts we often see Izzy in. So I'll probably be betting him by finish. I have him tied up in a bunch of parlays already, and still Adesanya. I'm curious your thoughts though. I don't know if you're picking Strickland to win, but you think he's going to grapple?
I mean, he should. Do I think he's going to? I think he'll try, at least early on. I will say this about Strickland. You mentioned I'm a fan. I certainly am. I like his style. I like that he comes forward, eats a ton of shots. It's almost similar to the Diaz's in that he can just take a ton of damage. He doesn't really have power in his division, but he puts out so much volume that he starts to wear on guys. He's just very, very frustrating to fight against. Better statistically defensively on the feet than Adesanya is, which really speaks to the quality of his striking ability, at least in this division. All that being said, I think Strickland being in this position is more a reflection of the state of the middleweight division than anything else. This is a guy who I like as a fan, but really, like, I don't know, like in 2023, he's not a guy who should be winning titles or fighting for titles in these upper weight classes. I mean, I don't know. I just think the sport's further than Sean Strickland is in a lot of ways. And as much as I like him, I do see Adesanya as the better fighter in this matchup. Certainly on the feet, much more power. Adesanya not really known for power, but Strickland does not do well defending kicks. As good as he is on the feet defending punches, the kicks do tend to get through. Even against Abus Magomedov, he was eating a lot of clean kicks early, biting on feints. And that's kind of a similar matchup to what he's going to see here. I think he will try to wrestle, and maybe he has some early success. I think maybe that's like his one potential path to victory. It's a very narrow path and not one I really expect to happen. But so often in this sport, we are forced to witness the unexpected. So I don't know. I think Strickland should be, I don't know, around +3, +400 here. We're seeing most books now have him +4 to 500. Adesanya the 6 to 700 range feels a little bit ridiculous. And I do think I'm leaning that Izzy gets the finish, but you got to remember, I mean, Strickland, sure, he was KO'd in that Pereira fight, but his run at middleweight, he's been extremely durable, eating shots from guys like Jared Cannonier, like Nasruddin Imavov and Abus Magomedov, and wearing them pretty well. So yeah, I think this could go longer than maybe some of Izzy's staunchest supporters are thinking. It's kind of Sean's style to just take a lot of damage early, slow things down, and start to make it ugly later on. I don't know. I think Strickland's a good story. I mean, he has a lot of similarities to Bisping going into that Rockhold fight and that major underdog, completely outskilled pretty much everywhere. But he does have heart. He does have guts. This is a guy who's been through a lot. I do like his story. I am a fan. He says a lot of dumb stuff, but he's entertaining. And he's raw about it too. I don't think he has to try that hard to just be himself. And I don't know. I think the only round Strickland's going to win here, he already did at the press conference, and Adesanya should be able to just pick him apart at range. Barring an injury or something dramatic early, like a scramble, I don't know. It just feels like Adesanya's fight to win. So I'm not crazy about the inside the distance, just knowing how good Sean's cardio and durability is, generally speaking. And Adesanya, a lot of the time he talks about opening up in fights, and we don't see it because he's so smart and so defensively sound that he doesn't really put himself in those positions. So I don't know. I think Adesanya is a pretty safe parlay piece. I do not like the price. I can see maybe sprinkling on the inside. But I'd be curious where like the even money over under is. Is it like 3.5 rounds, 4.5 rounds? Because I think I'm leaning the over 3.5. I think if Adesanya does finish this, it's probably going to be later. But yeah, pretty fun fight. I do think Strickland's outmatched, though. I don't really see him getting the grappling going here, at least enough to affect Adesanya to the point that he could pull off an upset.
I mean, you compare Strickland here to you know, the likes of Bisping going up against Luke Rockhold. Strickland himself this week compared it to. He says he needs to make it like Bisping versus Silva. I
The
just
Gastelum
see,
fight too.
yeah, I see a style. I mean, if you're crashing in like that against a guy like Izzy, you're gonna get caught. Like it's not a very sustainable style. While you want to catch the guy, while you want to see Izzy hurt, rocked in a fight, while you want to give one to take one, he's doing so against one of the absolute best to do it. So I really think it is going to be an uphill battle for Sean. I like what you've highlighted about him. And yeah, it is hard to get value where the line currently sits. But I think it stands still. Izzy pretty clearly here in Sydney this weekend. We'll move on now to the co-main event, a heavyweight matchup between Alexander Volkov and Tai Tuivasa. Volkov is sitting a sizable favorite in this fight at -250, with Tuivasa available at 2-to-1 odds. It's an interesting matchup. It's one that I'm not necessarily decided on yet. I would lean the way of Volkov, just what we've seen him able to do against other high-level strikers in the past. A 5-inch advantage in reach as well as a 5-inch advantage in height puts him in a good position here against a guy like Tai, who's shorter and stockier for the weight class. While we have seen Tai fight much bigger, taller men before with good success, Volkov is very skilled. And I think it's going to be more difficult for Tuivasa to get inside the range and land big shots on Volkov, as would normally be the case. I think he's a very live underdog, and I like that the pressure's sort of off of him. He is fighting here in Sydney, but coming off 2 consecutive losses, I think we should see the best version of Tai in a while, a little bit of more time off as well. I just think those long strikes from Volkov, the kicks up the middle, but also just what he's able to do with his hands, should keep Tuivasa at a safe distance early in this fight. And, the later it goes, the more it's going to favor Volkov, who should be able to carry a similar pace throughout the course of 15 minutes, while Tuivasa, as he's throwing these big, powerful haymakers, is going to be expending a much more energy than a guy like Volkov, who could get from point A to point B much quicker with his strikes. So I do favor him in this matchup. I could be convinced into playing some money on Tai as the dog, but it feels like a matchup Volkov should be able to win. He's just a guy I'm not very keen on betting either, based on the volatility in his fights.
Yeah, I mean, this is tricky because of the odds. I do think Volkov's certainly the rightful favorite, the better technical striker, going to have major advantages in reach here. I mean, yeah, Tai Tuivasa's knocked out Stefan Struve, who's one of the only guys taller than Volkov in existence as far as MMA goes. But Volkov's much more technically sound than Struve is. And the thing about Volkov, it's not only the hands, it's the kicks as well. He throws a really good teep up the middle, really good body kicks. And against Tai's soft body, that could be difficult. I will say this. I know you mentioned this card's built and carried by Adesanya, and I agree with you to a point, but I actually think the bigger sell here for most of this Western Sydney crowd is Tai Tuivasa, who still lives there. I mean, obviously they love Izzy down there, but he had the beef with Rob. There was a little bit of back and forth with that. He's from New Zealand. He's definitely got the crowd's back. Vice versa. The crowd definitely has his back, but Tai is their guy. They really do love him. So you said you don't think the pressure's on him here very much. I think he has a ton of pressure on him here, and I don't know that that's necessarily going to be a good thing. I think he's going to try to get Volkov out of there early. Probably has issues closing the distance in the larger cage. But yeah, at the odds, I mean, you could get Tai Tuivasa by KO around plus 300, which I think is his only real win condition. I'd rather play that than the Volkov money line, where he's now minus 250 on most books. So this is one of those weird situations where I'm going to back Volkov with my pick. I think he gets it done probably by decision. But yeah, I'm really not that confident, at least at the price he's at right now. So I think Volkov wins. Maybe bet him by decision to get a better price. But at the same time, it's heavyweight. We've seen Volkov knock guys out in surprising fashion. If he is mixing in that body work, Tuivasa is certainly susceptible to being KO'd, especially coming off 2 tough KO losses. But yeah, I think that the odds are a little wide, but I do favor Volkov, just a better technical striker. He uses his length well, much better than some of the other tall guys that Tai has had success against in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think a bit more about Tuivasa versus Gane. While he was getting pieced up by a more technical striker there, he did eat a lot of shots. I don't know if Volkov hits much harder necessarily. When Gane wants to commit to some shots, he really puts some sting on him. And yeah,
Yeah,
Tuivasa was able to clip him too. So certainly a live underdog.
definitely.
But I lean the way of Volkov too. Just picking a winner here. Moving on next, we have a flyweight belt between Manel Kape and Felipe dos Santos. We are recording this prior to weigh-ins. This is a fight I do want to see both fighters make weight successfully before involving my money on. Kape is taking this bout in a bit of a short notice appearance, having originally been slated to book Kaikara France here in Sydney. Probably the 10th fight that's fallen out for Kape since his last Octagon appearance. I mean, this guy just has an awful string of luck, whether it's him or his opponents, pulling out of fights, leaving him without an opponent. And now he draws into the 22-year-old Felipe dos Santos, who, while undefeated, is still rather green. He trains out of a good gym in Shootbox Diego Lima, and fights in a similar style to those guys like Charles DuBronx, like Wiley Cat, It's just I don't really think that Felipe dos Santos is going to be able to do much to Kape in the early striking exchanges of this fight. Manel Kape's an incredible striker. We've seen him sit, wait, land huge counter shots in a lot of fights prior, and really compared to most flyweights, guys at 125 pounds, no one packs as much of a single punch as Manel Kape. Um, I always think he's a bit tentative at times in his fights, waiting for those perfect counters to present themselves. I wouldn't imagine that to be an issue here today against a high pressure fighter like Felipe dos Santos. And well, Felipe is probably going to look to, get to the legs of a Kape, really grind on him, grapple a bit here. If Kape's able to, put together a few clean strikes, he should be able to take control of this fight rather early. And again, he's fighting an opponent much less skilled than not only himself, but the guys that he's been facing as of late. So I do think Kape is warranted as the sizable favorite in this spot. I think we'll see him land quite a few knees on Dos Santos here. And again, with his ability to time his counter strikes, pretty clear path to victory, in my opinion, for the prohibitive favorite. But eager to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, Dos Santos, interesting prospect. You mentioned how to shoot a box. He was booked twice to fight on Contender Series, first against Edgar Chairez last year. Chairez ended up signing with the UFC on short notice, so that fight fell apart. Then he was supposed to fight Luciano Pereira. Pereira missed weight. So yeah, he's getting the shot here on a pay-per-view now. Been out of action almost for a year, but that's not really his fault. Yeah, the shoot a box style right now, all these guys just kind of fight like Charles Oliveira, or at least they try to. They're dangerous on the feet, very willing to fall on their back and go into their guard. I mean, the issue for some of these guys, though, is they're just not Charles Oliveira. And I think we kind of see this with Dos Santos. Yes, he's aggressive. Yes, he wants to fight that same style. But coming off 2 decision wins over really mediocre opponents in Rafael Montoro and Hugo Paiva. I mean, Paiva's decent, but I don't know. That's a fight I think he probably should have finished if he's going to have success at the UFC level. Manel Kape, I liked him against Kai Kara-France. Really talented fighter, good everywhere. Came into the promotion against Pantoja, had a very close fight against the now current champion of the division. Has looked good in all his fights, wins or losses. You do mention that he is tentative at times, but I think in a fight like this, where he knows he should be outclassing his opponent significantly, yeah, I think he'll be a bit more aggressive. I do see the finish here. I think we could get the KO. I wouldn't be shocked by a submission if Dos Santos is on the mat, gets in a scramble, ends up on his back, something like that. Wouldn't be shocking to me here at all. I do think Kape gets it done inside the distance. These shooter box guys are always dangerous as long as they are active, but just knowing this kid hasn't been finishing many guys on the regional scene recently does give me enough confidence to just back Kape here as a parlay piece, probably bet him inside the distance, probably take the under 2.5 rounds as a parlay piece. This is one of the clearest spots in the card, in my opinion. And yeah, I just really like Kape. I really like the momentum he's carrying into this fight. And he's pissed off, man. I mean, so many fights have fallen out for him, like you mentioned. None of them are really his fault. Becoming one of the funnier shit talkers in the promotion, really, going at Adesanya in the press conference. And the UFC did feature that moment, I think, in one of their promos. So, yeah, I think they want to get behind him here. It's tough to find flyweights with a ton of personality right now. I think Manel Kape is that guy, and he's just another win or two away from a title shot.
Yeah, he certainly has an upward trajectory in that division, and yeah, I see him getting the win there this weekend. We have a rematch next to break down at heavyweight. Justin Tafa, a minus 210 favorite against Austin Lane here. This was a bout booked in June that ended less than 30 seconds into the contest when a gruesome eye poke of landed on Tafa, causing that bout to be a no contest. Not much to take from that 30 seconds. I mean, Tafa was stalking forward, cocking that left hand, looking to load up, land big shots from the southpaw stance as he normally will against the taller and a bit more agile Austin Lane. Lane does use his length well. He did have a good size advantage over Tafa. And when the cage locked, as someone who bet Tafa the first time around, I was nervous. Got to exhale a bit after that no contest, and ended up being the call. But I do feel a bit more confidence here in Tafa, now fighting his side of the world. Austin Lane was really only debuting on that UFC Jacksonville card because he is from Jacksonville. Now running this back in enemy territory presents a very different challenge for Lane. And yeah, I mean, aside from an eye poke, aside from, a weird early exchange, I think Tafa is going to, again, be the one pressuring forward, maybe absorbing the higher volume of strikes, but landing the much bigger and, more devastating blows over the course of this first round or two. Lane's shown the ability to take some big shots, but I certainly think if Tafa is going to connect with that left hand, it could be lights out for Lane. And again, we really can't take much from the first showing of these two. I don't reckon the odds the first time the bout went off between these two guys, but one would think Tafa does have the advantage yet again here, landing with a better power, putting out better guys before. I really don't think Austin Lane's UFC material, and I think that ends up getting proven here come Saturday in Sydney. But what are your thoughts on this heavyweight rematch?
Yeah, I mean, first I'm gonna disagree with you in saying Justin Lane isn't really UFC material, mostly just because the heavyweight division is terrible. There are much worse fighters than Austin Lane that are on the roster right now. You look at some of the guys that Tafa's beat. We have Jared Vandera. I'd rate Lane over him. That's one of Tafa's wins. Harry Hunsucker, who was in and out, terrible. Definitely wasn't UFC level. So yeah, I mean, I was with you on Tafa the first time these guys fought. Totally agree, though. You see them in the cage. The visual was not really good as a Tafa backer. Lane, the much bigger fighter, was landing huge shots, big body kicks. It was taking Tafa some time to close that distance. And that's what he has to do in almost all of his fights. He's definitely short at 6 feet for a heavyweight. Taking on Austin Lane here, former NFL player who was 6'6" with an 80-inch reach. Very big. And I think there was a major layoff before that first Tafa fight because Lane knew now that he's part of the UFC, he has to make considerable improvements. So, like, all this being said, I know I'm kind of blowing smoke on the Lane side. I don't know. I still kind of think Tafa gets it done. He's going to have to close the distance. But in such a close fight, in my opinion, I don't know. Like, part of me thinks Lane could maybe mix in some grappling. Part of me thinks Lane has the better cardio. It's just really tough for me to get excited about Justin Tafa. I mean, he really has no quality wins in the UFC. I actually think Junior Tafa is the better striker of the two. I know he's coming off a win. But yeah, it's tricky here. I just think Lane's the better athlete, the quicker fighter, the bigger fighter, but Tafa definitely more power in his shots. So I don't know. I just think the line's too wide. I find myself slightly leaning Lane right now, which seems a bit insane, fading the Sydney fighter in Sydney. So I'm going back and forth on this one. I'm definitely going to ask anyone watching this to defer to our article Saturday morning. But I definitely think this fight is closer than the odds suggest. And I think just watching the first 30 seconds of the first meeting, it's really tough to get excited about Tafa at better than 2-1 odds. So I don't know. I just really don't like the price. I think Tafa probably wins it 6 out of 10 times, but that's not what these odds are indicating.
Yeah, and just to clarify, -180, I believe the closing line the first time these two met. So just paying a little worse number.
Late buy on Lane, I think. So keep an eye on it.
Yeah, and again, he looked bigger. I was nervous holding all my Tafa tickets that first time around. So I'm certainly not.
Want to do that again? Yeah, that's how I'm feeling.
I'm not betting anything heavy on this fight, but Tafa is going to be my pick to win. I think the knockout does materialize for him here facing Austin Lane one more time. And the last fight on the main card is a pick'em bout at light heavyweight between Tyson Pedro and Anton Turkalj. Pedro lost by decision to Makdessi Bukauskas his last time out. Not really the type of fight you want to see from, a prospect that kind of seemed back in the mix, on the rise here at the heavier weight divisions. Not a great showing, not the worst showing. I mean, he scored some early takedowns, but really did not find sustained success against Bukauskas, who was just the much better striker over the course of those 15 minutes. I feel like this is a much better matchup for Pedro. Anton Turkalj is not known for his hands. While he has good power, he's really somebody who elects for a grappling heavy approach in his fights. He lands a very high volume of takedowns. And, I feel like if he is going to be shooting in on Pedro or looking to get this fight on the mat, we've seen a lot of good work out of Tyson Pedro in terms of his own offensive jiu-jitsu, ability to counter wrestle, ability to get on top in fights that do end up hitting the mat. He is big for a light heavyweight. It's not like he's seriously outsizing Turkalj here, but I do think Pedro is going to have the advantages if these two are in scrambles and situations like that. on the ground, as well as Pedro having the cleaner hands, the better technical striking when these two are going to be on the feet. So I favor Pedro slightly. I do not want to bet him big in this spot just based on his last matchup. I think it is a pretty good number though, and I really don't rate Turkalj highly in terms of UFC talent either. I think, he's going to have a hard time landing accurate strikes against a guy like Pedro. And again, if these two are grappling, it's anyone's guess that could happen. Perhaps, the takedowns are landing for him and he's able to control Pedro for 10 minutes in this fight. I just see Pedro being too crafty on the mat, able to maneuver out of those positions and get into some advantageous spots of his own. So Pedro's going to be the pick for me in this matchup.
Yeah, I like Pedro as well. Took something major away from press conferences. Tyson Pedro said he caught I forget how he described it, but I think it was like a flu or like something gastro from his daughter going into that last fight. He said he felt terribly sick, and then he mentioned some artist who I've never heard of. But he said he came out with a song that day of the fight called Flu Game. And he was like, oh, this is a sign from the gods that I'm supposed to have my Michael Jordan flu game here. I'm sick as shit. I should probably pull out of this fight. But yeah, this is a sign. I got to go in there, have my flu game. And yeah, he looked terrible. He looked sick. I mean, he did not do much early. His cardio depleted very quickly. And I don't think he has great cardio. But at the same time, I don't think it's nearly as bad as it looked in that Bukowskis fight. On the other side, we have Turkalj. I remember when he was on Contender Series, I think we both backed him against Dos Santos. He won a close decision. And he didn't get a contract. He got awarded a UFC contract to come in and get killed by Almeida on short notice. I know Dana loves Victor Petrino. I think the UFC thought he was going to get a KO over Turkalj in that spot. And it feels like they're going to try to use him again here against Pedro to get him back on track in front of his home crowd. So I like Pedro here. I love the number -120, 30, whatever you're looking at. I think you could even, if you're a little afraid of the cardio, I mean, you could get him in the first round in some books around +400 right now. Just throw a little bit on that. And if it misses, okay, but at the same time, I mean, you're getting a really good payout if he does hit his most likely win condition. So I like Pedro to get it done early here. I think by submission or by KO, he's going to be aggressive in front of the home crowd. I think he wants to come out here and show that that last performance was a fluke. And sometimes fighters say things, you think it's just excuses. But he said he spent this whole camp away from his family because he didn't want to get sick again. Sounded very serious. This is a guy who wasn't training at City Kickboxing. He is now. He said he's been really inspired by Eugene Berriman and just being around championship level athletes. Pedro, a guy who's always had the skills, but was always kind of a questionable character, kind of a partier, kind of some similarities to Tuivasa in that way. But sounds like his head's on straight. Sounds like he's healthy. I mean, the guy stayed away from his family because they got him sick last time. And yeah, I think the UFC does not think very highly of Anton Turkalj. He could probably keep this fight interesting if he's not finished early, but at the same time, I think Pedro gets it done one way or the other. I'm pretty confident at this number two. I'm going to back him here, take him at his word that he was sick that last time out.
Yeah, I certainly think at near even odds, the value is on that side. The preliminary card will begin 8 p.m. Eastern time. It closes with a light heavyweight matchup, just like the main card opens. This with Carlos Ulberg -280 against Da Un Jung. I love Carlos Ulberg. I've been on him every UFC fight thus far. He obviously had the one hiccup against Kennedy and Zetspu, but aside from that, this guy is legit. The kickboxing's clean. He has 4 knockouts in the UFC, landing 15 significant strikes or fewer in those bouts. It does not take a lot from him because he has some serious power and the ability to string together, punches as needed. His right hand's great, but he's got great hooks from both sides. His ability to sneak in, switch, hit a hook, and landing with 62% significant strike accuracy clearly illustrates his proficiency when it comes to kickboxing and striking on the feet. Da Un Jung, somebody who we've seen against high-level kickboxers, Dustin Jacoby, finished by a right cross there, losing back-to-back in his 2 previous Octagon appearances. And while I think Jung's okay, I really think against these higher level strikers, he's going to run into trouble. And on the spot of featured prelim, it certainly seems like a showcase bout for Carlos Ulberg. In terms of a path to victory for Jung, he'd want to make this a bit dirty, pushing Ulberg up against the fence, grinding out minutes that way. We have seen him execute takedowns and, get on top of guys in the UFC as well. I think that'd certainly be a fine game plan against such a high-level striker opposite him. But I really don't see him having great success getting inside on the legs of Ulberg. This will be a bigger 30-foot octagon here, and with the speed advantage possessed by Carlos Ulberg, I think Jung is going to be eating a lot of shots on his way into range. And if it's not lights out from there, Ulberg's just going to continue building upon his early success in this fight, picking apart Jung, and I think eventually finding a finish. I would imagine it materializes early. As I said before, not only is his striking quick and hands very fast, but Ulberg hits with some serious power, and I think we're going to see him put out a few more guys as he continues to ascend the light heavyweight rankings. I do not think Jung is going to be a hiccup in his way in doing so. I think, compared to some of the guys Ulberg is fighting, this is a reasonable step up in competition. Ihor Pretoria, that is no surprise, but now facing Jung, I see him passing this test with flying colors and getting his hand raised once again. Ulberg, especially at this number, is one of my favorite plays on the card this weekend.
Yeah, so I like Ulberg, but I like him closer to minus 250 than the 300 we're seeing some places. He should get it done here. Like you said, he's the better striker. Jung, against Dustin Jacoby, you think he tried to grapple in that spot? He really didn't. The one time he looked good with the grappling was against William Knight, and at the time, I think people thought a little bit higher of William Knight than they do now. A guy who's really fizzled out of the UFC. So the one path for Jung here is maybe to grapple, get it going early, but Ulberg's done a pretty good job, even though he hasn't been tested much at defending takedowns, 100% takedown defense. Jung, decent grappler, but it's really not his strong suit by any means, and I think the UFC is trying to get Ulberg another win here. Really good striker. I think he's going to have issues once he approaches that top 10 of the division. Really just not as well-rounded as a lot of the other competitors. And while he's a very good technical kickboxer, I think when we see him getting some of these bloodier wars, as he's going to have to, against guys towards the top of the division, he could run into some issues. But I don't see that here against Jung. A guy who generally fights to the level of his competition. Whether he's fighting Sam Alvey, Kennedy Njoku, he's in a competitive fight. But I think here against Ulberg, they are setting him up, like you mentioned, the featured prelim, trying to get people to buy that main card. And the crowd should be going wild here for Ulberg, who's had a lot of fights in the Apex. I think he's excited here to get this one in front of mostly home crowd for him. And Jung, a guy I think the UFC liked at one point, but he's just been a major disappointment. And while I do think this is, I don't know, it's similar to the level of competition he's been facing, I just think stylistically it's tough. I picked Devin Clark against him because I knew Clark would be able to grapple. Obviously, this is not a similar fight in that regard, but I just see Ulberg is staying a step ahead on the feet. And I think the takedown defense will hold up at least enough to keep this standing where he should be able to find a KO. Jung, early in his career, kind of known for being durable, but we saw him rocked in that Sam Alvey fight, and ever since he does seem a bit chinny. We saw him taken out with that right cross against Dustin Jacoby. Thinking we see similar here, probably a hook on a counter. Ulberg probably gets it done in the first or second round via KO. But if you see Jung start grappling, making it ugly, I think that's his one path, but we haven't seen that fight IQ out of him at all over the past couple of years. So I think Ulberg does get it done here.
Yep, absolutely agreed. And we'll move on now to a featherweight matchup. This should be a fun one. Jack Jenkins, a minus 210 favorite, taking on Kape Mariscal. Curious your thoughts on this matchup. Still a bit torn myself.
Yeah, I like Jenkins here. I don't love the price. He's over minus 200 most books. Kape came in on short notice to take on Trevor Peek. Really experienced guy in the regional scene. Took him a while to get the call to the UFC. But everyone loves Trevor Peek because he's kill or be killed. But in that fight, we saw that even against a step up, technically, he's going to have some issues. And I think Kape did represent that. And we saw on short notice that he looked good and he got that win. So they're giving him another fight here that should be fun. Two really durable guys. Mariscal likes to come forward. So does Jenkins. I think Jenkins might be able to wrestle here a little bit if he has to. I also don't expect him to do that all that much. I mean, as good as Chepe looked against Peak, it was really a stylistic matchup that was just perfect for him. This is a guy who likes to box. He is pretty heavy on that lead leg, which I think is going to prove troublesome for him here against the guy in Jenkins, whose most dangerous weapon is probably that leg kick. I backed Jenkins last time out against Emmers. Very close fight. I think he could have gone either way. But yeah, I do rate Emmers a lot higher than I do Mariscal. Mariscal's a fun fighter, comes forward, but he's kind of that guy that makes other guys look good. And against Trevor Peak, I think they brought him in for that reason, but Peak was kind of exposed. I think this is a better matchup. Jenkins, another guy in front of the home crowd here. Yeah, I think he gets it done. I will say this though, you're probably going to get better value on the decision. I think if he is going to find a finish, it's probably going to have to come on leg kicks. That's something that's tough to really count on. So it's either Jenkins by leg kicks, but I think you're getting a better number to just bet him by decision, or maybe parlaying with someone else in that -200 range, maybe an Ulberg and get you closer to even money. So yeah, I like Jenkins here. I think he gets it done. I just think he's the more well-rounded, potent and crisper striker. But Mariscal is going to make it ugly. He's going to make it tough. It's not going to be a walk in the park by any stretch.
Yeah, I think a late finish could also materialize for Jenkins just for landing the cleaner shots, wearing
Yeah.
down Chepe. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that matchup against Trevor Peak, it really highlighted the strengths of Mariscal because he was fighting another guy that's not the most technical, just willing to go forward, kind of brawl, throw haymakers. Against a guy like Jack Jenkins, we are going to see the Aussie, the much more refined striker, making the better decisions when it comes to striking on the feet. I like Jenkins' ability to switch stances, as you alluded to, throwing the kicks as well. I think that while Chepe is going to be moving forward in the early half of this fight, as those shots start to add up, if he's not able to connect, find a finish for his own within those first 7-8 minutes, this is going to sway further the way of Jenkins, who has the ability to grind out, a decision win if needed. The ability to land a higher number of strikes, over the course of a 15-minute fight. The numbers don't necessarily reflect that, but again, if Chepe's marching forward, eating these, higher volume combinations from Jack Jenkins here, the 1, 2, 3 shot combinations that are coming from the way of Chepe are not going to be as effective. I also find, the types of strikes he throws, you're going to see big, powerful overhands, big kicks at times. But Jenkins is going to be able to mix it up much more fluidly. He moves better on the feet. He's much quicker. And in terms of who's going to be able to, keep range and work from distance in this matchup, I would favor Jenkins as well. You highlighted his ability to score takedowns, win that way. I think that Chepe, not necessarily in that fight against Peak where takedowns were scored, but in prior bouts, we have seen a bit of grappling chops out of him as well. So if these two hit the mat, anything could happen. But yeah, I think Jenkins is the rightful favorite in this spot. I don't really want to overrate, Mariscal off that performance over Trevor Peak. The line seems to reflect it appropriately while also not discrediting him for, earning in what was a tough UFC win. So I think he is a live underdog in this spot, but one would think Jenkins should be the one to get his hand raised just based on the skill of each. I think he's the much more well-rounded fighter. We'll look now at a lightweight matchup between Jamie Mullarkey and John Makdessi. Mullarkey's -280 in the spot against John Makdessi, who, has had a long UFC career, not really the most fruitful. Last year, he took a loss facing Nasrat Haqparast, who we'll touch on briefly, also fighting on this card. His only win as of late came against a very green and Ignacio Bahamondes, and that was a split decision fight. Well, Jamie Mullarkey has really fought the upper echelon of top 15 lightweights. Not always the best competition, like more recent bouts against Francisco Prado, Muhammad Naimov on short notice, who he did, take a loss to. But we have seen him in the cage with guys like Michael Johnson, Jalen Turner, Devontae Smith, guys that probably, especially at this stage of his career, would make easier work of John Makdessi. Mullarkey's not really a guy you could trust as a large betting favorite. That was proven his last time out, when he got caught by that shot and put out. But I think he is going to be the steadier fighter in this matchup. I think Makdessi has, the ability to last to decisions against a lot of tough guys and This is probably a fight that does end up going a full 15 here. But one would think Mullarkey is going to be the one, with his foot on the gas pedal, head down, working the clinch against Makdessi. Makdessi's still okay. I mean, certainly at this age, I really do not see a bright future. Like 38 years old in the lightweight division, that's never a great sign. But still, when he's able to work his offense, strike at range, put kicks together, he is going to be somebody who's still a wily vet with good chance of winning. I just find Mullarkey the much more amped fighter, the much more willing to compete, bite down, go for the win. Where again, Makdessi at this stage of his career isn't really one to put forth the best effort in his fights. I see it likely being a Mullarkey decision win here. Again, maybe doubling or even grappling a bit to control Makdessi in this spot. But certainly a fight that he should be able to control given his physical skills and the advantages he holds over Makdessi in terms of height, strength, reach. Should be able to get the job done.
Yeah, I never want to lay this price on Jamie Mullarkey again after that last fight against Muhammad Naimov. I do agree he's the rightful favorite, but I actually think Makdessi is probably the better technical striker here. Here's 70% striking defense for Makdessi in his long career in the UFC. That really is solid for a lightweight. Mullarkey, decent on the feet, really kind of wonky in his style, but it does work for him. He does get off more than 4 significant strikes landed per minute. But I think you mentioned it briefly. I think the path for him here is to grapple. I think he has to wrestle. He's averaging nearly 3 takedowns per 15 minutes. Makdessi, decent takedown defense, but we saw him taken down multiple times against Haqparast in his last fight. A guy I don't really consider to be a wrestler at all. So yeah, if Mullarkey wants to stand and bang here for 3 rounds in front of his home crowd, Makdessi's going to be a live underdog. Really, really solid defense, rolls with strikes well, does a good job just staying out of his opponent's range. But at the same time, I do think Mullarkey has a very clear path to victory here. Mixing in the wrestling, grappling frequently, really grinding on Makdessi for 3 rounds. And I think coming off the loss too, I'm a little bit more confident in him, just knowing that he knows what he has to do to win here. So Mullarkey definitely took his opponent lightly last time out. I don't think we see that here this time around. But yeah, anything over minus 200 on this kid, he's really hasn't been all that great. Yes, he's been in there against top level guys. But yeah, I mean, the fight he won over Michael Johnson was very close. Johnson's in the twilight of his career. I mean, you mentioned Devontae Smith. I don't really rate him. And other than that, who's his best win? I mean, it is Michael Johnson, but that's really the only notable win that Mullarkey has right now. So I think he does get one here against Makdessi, but he's going to have to get the wrestling going. Pretty confident he's able to, but not as confident as the price we're seeing across most books. Probably a guy I'd leave out of parlays. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. Can't get fooled again by Jamie Mullarkey.
Yeah, and I mean, fooled last time as minus 450, minus 500 where he closed. Just one of those that makes you want to bang your head into a wall. Not investing heavily in him as a 280 favorite today. Certainly better options. Minus 280,
Yeah,
go with Ulberg.
across the card.
Go with, yeah, exactly. Moving on now, lightweight matchup between Nasrat Haqparast and Landon Quinones. This is an interesting fight. I mean, I really like Haqparast in general. He's like a fringe top 20, top 25 lightweight in my opinion, but I mean, certainly a lot of tools to advance far in this division, especially at only 28 years old. Southpaw, really good hand speed. You'll see the boxing of Haqparast in this fight. His ability to string together long combinations against more inefficient strikers. And Quinones, we've seen him primarily striking in his fights, also out of the southpaw stance, but more so using outside movement and pitter patter type style, getting into the pocket and out of the pocket. Where Haqparast also does excel, it's just when it comes to these boxing exchanges, I find it very hard to see him matching the hand speed of Haqparast. Just his ability to put together these strikes, and his head movement solid too. He could eat shots. The occasions he does get clipped, just something that we have really not seen proven out of Quinones to this point. I think it's a huge test for Quinones stepping in this spot and taking on a guy as credentialed as Haqparast. Well, we've seen him win some, lose some in the UFC. The level of competition has been much higher than this. And while Quinones is still young, may still have a promising future. Training at a good gym, King's MMA. I just don't think he's going to have the tools to, effectively beat Haqparast in what is likely going to be a striking heavy affair. We should see Nasrat land the better strikes over the course of this fight. I'm not sure about the finish, just based on his ability to go fit 3 rounds and fighting to a lot of decisions prior. But I don't see a clear path to victory for Quinones pulling off the upset here. I'm not sure if you do.
Yeah, I don't really see the upset. I will say I think Quinones is a little bit disrespected on this line. I mean, he was embarrassed on the Ultimate Fighter against Jason Knight, but he tried to take Knight down. Knight really good jiu-jitsu. That was just a terrible, terrible decision, and I don't think we're going to see that here against Haqparast. Quinones, just to toot his horn a little bit, he does have power on the feet. Some nice wins with Titan FC, which is a decent promotion. Doing some grappling tournaments lately, things like that. So clearly looking to improve on those holes in his game. And at 27 years old, training at a King's MMA and also the Goat Shed, which is a gym kind of on the up right now. I do like Quinones' upside. But yeah, it does feel like a little bit too much too soon here against Haqparast. His losses, I mean, he's gone the distance with the likes of Dan Hooker, Bobby Green, guys who've been in and out of the top 10. He usually looks really good against inferior competition. Last time out, we just talked about Makdessi, mixed in the takedowns there, and I think that could be a path to victory for him here. He should stay a step ahead on the feet. Haqparast, a pretty damn durable guy as well. We saw him KO'd by Drew Dober. Dober hits like a truck, so I think he's going to have enough durability here to maybe weather a big shot or two from Quinones, but he's going to be the better technical striker, going to be landing more volume, and I think he can fall back on that wrestling if he needs to. A lot of times when you see lines this wide, it's wise to take the guy inside the distance. I actually think there might be value on this fight goes the distance just because Quinones is durable if he is anything. So yeah, you're getting around even money for this fight to go the distance. I think that's a decent bet if you don't want to merge Haqparast into too many of your parlays. So yeah, I like Haqparast here. I do think the line's a little bit ridiculous. I think there's some other favorites on this card that could be wider than this one. And yeah, just relatively speaking, I don't love the price, but I do think Haqparast is the better fighter. Should stay a step ahead. Should get this done.
You check that? It's even odds just to go to decision. I do like that.
I think it's like 110. Yeah, so close to even.
Yeah, I'd say certainly, either guy has the ability to get the finish. I don't see Haqparast getting finished, but I like the value on this fight going a full 15, certainly.
Yes, agreed.
All right. Well, we will move on now to the early preliminary portion of this card. 3 fights left to break down. This starting 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Blood Diamond back as a sizable underdog here against Charlie Radtke. Minus 330 for Charlie against the Blood Diamond, who could have at plus 260. What are your thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, Blood Diamond never should have been in the UFC. There's a lot of kickboxers that can come in and get by just on that. They really developed decent ground game over the years. But, I mean, Blood Diamond got in really late. And, I mean, we're seeing Ulberg, another guy out of City Kickboxing, who's in his mid-30s, definitely got into the game late. But we see the athletic advantages he has. We see the length. We see the improvement. I mean, Blood Diamond in his prime as a kickboxer, known for really flashy KOs, relied a lot on speed. A lot of those things are kind of waning at this point in his career, and he has been terrible. Everything I've seen out of him in the UFC has been disappointing. I mean, even in moments on the feet against Kose, he really didn't separate himself as a striker in that fight. And anyone with half of a ground game should be able to take him down. I think the UFC, I mean, Radtke's decent, well-rounded, gritty guy, like kind of the prototypical regional fighter. Another guy that fights out of MMA Masters. So decent gym, decent prospect, coming off some nice wins, questionable level of competition, but CFFC has statistically done better than a lot of the other regional promotions in the UFC. And he had a grappling bout scheduled with Joe Pyfer, which is pretty funny. I found interesting. But yeah, if he's working on that grappling, I think he's going to want to do it here. He'd have to be very dense or be taking some sort of money under the table not to really shoot for takedowns early and often in this one. I think he could be competitive in the striking, but at the same time, that would just be very stupid. I think the reason he's a big favorite here is because people expect him to grapple. I don't really rate Radtke that highly as a prospect. I think he's getting in late. at 33 years old after a long regional career for a reason. I mean, you always have to kind of question what took so long with some of these guys. But yeah, I mean, he's been in there with guys like Austin Hubbard, certainly bigger fighters than what he's going to be seeing here against Blood Diamond. So I think Radtke gets it done. I think he probably gets it done inside the distance, maybe by submission. Tie him into some parlays, not too many, just because, I mean, I don't know. It's not the type of fighter I'm ever looking to back at this type of number. I just think the path is just so clear. Blood Diamond, cool name, tons of hype for Mizzy and the rest of CKB when he came in. Total dud though, in my opinion, and I think he's going to be out of the promotion here with another loss. And yeah, he helped Volk train for Yair, but all he did was just throw crazy kicks at him. That's really not going to help his game against the groundler. So I like Radtke here. Blood Diamond 3-2 professionally in MMA. I think this is the end of that experiment.
I'm not so certain, but it's a tough one. It's a tough one. I find it very
I mean,
similar.
Radtke's not great, but like, man, this guy is not UFC level. Yeah.
I find it very similar to the Orion Kosuke fight, which was one that Blood Diamond lost. But that third round was 4 minutes of top control and 2 takedowns for Orion Kosuke, where I find Radtke to have pretty suspect cardio. If we do see a third round in this fight, I'm not sure he has the gas tank to necessarily hold it. He is the jiu-jitsu coach at his gym. I know he had also trained prior at MMA Masters, and you know, I would assume a grappling heavy game plan to be what we see out of him in this spot. This fight is minus 270 to minus 250 not to go to decision. I think it really is not going to. It's either going to be Radtke early, getting that submission, taking down Blood Diamond, choking him out, Blood Diamond landing some sort of flashy KO, or again, if this gets into a late round 2, round 3, I could see Blood Diamond, after defending some takedowns, being the fresher fighter, able to switch stances and, you know, put together some big strikes, landing on the sizable favorite here. Really is not a warranted price tag, but I don't know if I'm going to be suckered into betting on Blood Diamond again here. Just such a clear deficiency in the grappling. Anyone you would think who's able to take him down with some semblance of jiu-jitsu is going to slice through him like butter. And it would not surprise me if that's the case this weekend. So as much as I'd like to back him against somebody who's, you know, a sizable favorite and really not warranted as one, I think it's an uphill battle for Blood Diamond. He has to worry about the takedowns from the jump, and you know, if he's getting his ass put on the mat in the early going of this fight, it's probably going to be a wrap for Charlie Radtke.
Just one more thing real quick. Definitely keep an eye on the weigh-ins here. And if Radtke makes weight and he looks good, I like him even more. His grappling match with Pyfer was scheduled to take place at 205 pounds, which is insane. This is a fight at 170. I mean, everyone knows that if you have a weight and strength advantage, which Radtke should here after the weight cut, he should be able to wrestle fairly easily. So just keep an eye on him. Make sure he looks good at weigh-ins. But if he does, I do expect wrestling and grappling.
He's gonna look great. He's got
yeah.
pro MMA fights 155. Making welterweight's no issue for Radtke. He's gonna make it just fine. So
that fight at 205 is baffling though. Why was he
I
scheduled
mean,
at
grappling
205?
match. I mean, and then that was it didn't materialize with Pyfer. It was Mearsheider stepped in, took that one. So huge guy. But still, grappling's a little different. I see him grappling in this fight, getting the win over Blood Diamond. We'll move on now. A fun featherweight matchup with Shane Jung minus 180 against Gabriel Miranda. Miranda just 0-1 thus far in his UFC career. Against Shane Jung, who's had the much longer tenure in the promotion, but on a 3-fight losing streak coming into this. I mean, the fights have not been awful. He was finished, but the past 2 have gone to decision, and been rather competitive at that. He's not always the most aggressive, but he is somebody who has, you know, city kickboxing, great kickboxing in his arsenal. He's going to be looking to utilize the striking here against Gabriel Miranda, who, well, you know, potent, certainly live on the feet, would much prefer to see this be a fight that hits the mat. He wants to grapple, probably chase a submission here against a kickboxer like Shane Jung. We've seen Jung certainly fall flat at times, put on lackluster performances, fall to the likes of lesser competition. But I'm not necessarily one to back the underdog here in Miranda. He may be a trendy pick on this card, you know, with you know, a handful of dogs to choose from. but certainly somebody who has this stylistic edge if this were to hit the mat. I just think it's a good bounce back opportunity for Shane Young. He's either done toast at just 30 years old, or he gets back in the win column here in what I would consider a favorable stylistic clash. He's a bit smaller, but certainly stronger than a guy like Miranda. I see him keeping him off of him and for the most part. And if these two are to hit the mat, he should be able to leverage his strength to stay in an advantageous position and really just have to avoid the submissions from guard that Miranda may try to pull off. So, and that was a loss to Benoit Saint Denis for Miranda in that UFC debut. Certainly somebody who I think very highly of, even more highly of after this past weekend in Paris. Great performance from him. I just think Shane Young, while a much better matchup on paper for a guy like Miranda, he is still going to struggle when it comes to the outside striking and closing the distance against a talented kickboxer like this. So Young's volatile, probably not somebody I'd rush to bat at minus 180 or minus 170, but I do see him as the warranted favorite in this matchup.
Yeah, this is one I honestly need to spend a little bit more time on. Shane Young is not good. Decent little striker in the pocket, but I mean, he really doesn't have any power, so it's really tough for him to pull away on the scorecards, even when he is the better striker in a lot of these fights. Miranda, submission grappler. I mean, Young's never been submitted, so that makes it a little bit interesting, or at least he hasn't in the UFC. I don't think he has professionally either. But yeah, I mean, I need to spend more time on this one. I can't put my money on Shane Young, I think, either way. But I want to see, maybe if Miranda has the cardio, he can control this on the mat. I know you mentioned you think Young might be strong enough to get back up, but Miranda, I mean, just coming off a fight with Benoit Saint Denis, a lot of his career has been spent at 155 pounds. I think he could have the strength advantage here. So not really confident in the cardio, not really confident in him finding the finish. So I just need to see a few more things on him regionally just to know that he's going to be able to last in the third round before I want to put my money on him as an underdog. But yeah, it's really tough to back Shane Young as any sort of favorite against anyone in the UFC. I'm pretty surprised he wasn't cut after that last fight against Blake Bilder. I mean, Bilder has looked decent, but really not a super gifted striker by any stretch. And that was a very close fight on the feet, and it was mostly on the feet. So I don't know. Really tough to get excited about either of these guys, but it should be fun scrap. I mean, they're both pretty aggressive. Good fight to kind of put towards the front of the card just to get people excited. But as far as the level of technical ability, not too much to get excited about this
one. And just to touch on that last time out against Blake Bilder, Young did defend 6 of 7 takedowns in that spot. Something you'd like to see against a guy like Miranda here. And yeah, Bilder won because he landed 110 significant strikes. Clearly outworked Young in that fight. Not something I see from the Brazilian here on Saturday, but certainly not a very confident pick. Certainly should be a fun fight when these two get locked in the cage. And last but certainly not least, our opener, a welterweight fight between UFC debutants, Kevin Jousset, a small favorite against the oncoming Kiefer Crosbie. Have you dug into this one? Do you have a pick for me in this matchup?
Yeah, I've done a bit. I think I need to a little bit more. Jousset, another city kickboxing guy. Very different than a lot of their roster over there, though. He's a guy who does like to grapple. Not the best wrestling entries, really not a great technical grappler, but a gritty guy who was pretty decent everywhere. He's gone to war a lot on the regional scene. I think he's a Hex 2 division champ. Not the best promotion, but at the same time, I mean, that's tough to do. For anyone at any level. So just the fact that he could capture 2 titles in 2 different weight classes does speak to him a little bit. But another guy who's kind of getting into the UFC later in his career. Same with Kiefer Crosbie. Crosbie, pretty interesting guy in that I think he's kind of like on the influencer boxer scene right now in Ireland. He had a boxing match recently that he won. He did KO Alex Cowboy Oliveira on a regional fight for Rise FC. But yeah, Oliveira just showing up, taking checks, getting knocked out, doesn't really seem to be anywhere near his prime. But it does feel like that's part of the reason that we're seeing Crosbie get this fight here. Irish MMA, other than Ian Gary, and if you want to include Sean O'Malley, hasn't looked very good, coming off 2 losses on that Paris card. I think this fight was originally supposed to be on that Paris card. I'm not entirely sure, because I think Jousset reps France, even though he fights out in KCB. So maybe they put him on this just so he'd be with the rest of his team. But there was a lot of France versus Ireland on that card, so something something else I want to look into. But yeah, I'll say, I mean, Crosbie definitely looks the part more. Really strong frame. Wouldn't be surprised if he's on some sketchy supplements. Really, really kind of a brick. A wall, for lack of a better word. Another guy training out of SPG Ireland, gonna come forward. Really fun fighting style, pretty crisp boxing, but at the same time, low fight IQ. Doesn't wear damage well. We've seen him rocked at times. And yeah, I think Jousset should have a grappling advantage here. But with Crosbie being the stronger fighter, I don't know that Jousset's going to be able to keep him down. When I initially saw this fight announced, I liked Jousset, but kind of watching his film now, I'm less than inspired watching these recent title fights against kind of mediocre competition. I'm going to have to spend a little bit more time digging into this one, but pretty low level on both sides. I do think Crosby's the more likely to finish, but I think Jousset could stay a step ahead, especially if he leans on the grappling here. But pretty much lined about where it should be. Feels like about a coin flip to me.
Yeah, Crosbie as well. Previously fighting in Bellator. As you mentioned, the SBG Ireland camp, solid camp. All the special juice, Johnny Walker, McGregor, just pumping these guys full. You think Kavanaugh? No, I'm sure Crosby's clean, and yeah, he may have a bit of a strength advantage here, but he is one to strike quite a bit, and against a kickboxer like Jousset, I
Is
could see.
Jousset a kickboxer?
Huh?
I don't even think you can call him a kick. He's
I mean, I would
wrestling a
consider
lot.
him. So he does have the wrestling to more so than a lot of the guys on the CKB team. But I see him striking with Crosby in this fight, and perhaps to his detriment, as you said, Crosby can land the bigger shots and things of the sort. But he's got good boxing, you said. Maybe kickboxing isn't the term. He throws some leg kicks out there here and there, but it's really his hands that do the better work. And in terms of outside striking, he does have an advantage in most fights. Standing 6'2", having a 5-inch reach advantage here in this matchup against Crosby. It's going to depend on the style of fight we see. If it's going to be, in the pocket, if Crosby's going to be crashing the distance or trying to work along the fence, a guy like Jousset, I could see him finding a lot of success. But I feel like over a fight that goes a full 3 rounds, that has more prolonged exchanges at range between the two, and one where perhaps a takedown or two is all that's landed, and it's coming from the Jousset side. He probably is going to be the rightful favorite in this spot. I have dug into this fight a little bit, and he's probably going to be the side that I end up on. I feel like out of the city kickboxing team, the ones more likely to lose are here at the bottom of the card, but I don't think Crosby is necessarily anything that special. And while this should be a fun matchup, Jousset is going to be the lean for me here as we are recording this earlier in the week. But should be a fun one. Should be a fun card top to bottom. This UFC 293 coming at you live from Sydney. Nick, as always, I appreciate you breaking down the card with me. Again, you will want to tune in for the pay-per-view, 10 p.m. on Saturday. Should be a great night of fights from Sydney, Australia. The UFC continues to roll on. World domination from Paris now to Sydney. Where will they be next? But Nick, as always,
The Apex.
yeah, back to Vegas as it should be. Oh, should be a great Independence Day card too coming next week. But first, for all of our viewers here at Dine Sports, you enjoy UFC 293 this weekend in Sydney. Thank you.